So your granddaughter is Megan Sorensen.
Megan Sorensen, she was here for several years.
She ran the place.
That's right, she did.
Yeah. What did she think of the place?
Very great. I mean, Megan's the type of a girl that is very conscientious about everything she does. And she figured that this was a very good place to start. So, of course, now she's at Chautauqua, and she likes that too.
She does a very good job wherever she is. Now, are you from Jamestown, Leo?
I was born in Summerdale. No, I was born in Sherman.
Okay.
So, lived here my whole life, yes.
And what did your mom and dad do?
Well, my father was a salesman.
Sorry, just make that look a little bit better.
This is optics.
You have to do that. With me, you're going to have to do it many times.
Your dad.
Okay, Mr. Zimmer said that you wanted everything to come right from here.
Yep, exactly.
So actually, my experiences started way before the war. My dad was a World War I veteran. And after the war, he moved from Sherman and worked in Mayville, and then finally bought a store in Hamburg. And there was a lot of Germans, actually, that were friends of the family and lived there. The reason I say this is that perhaps we were made aware of things that was happening in Germany a little bit more than most people might. So,
Such
as a result, my dad had his clothing store there, had 2 stores, owned their own house, and along came the Great Depression, which I was part of. He lost everything, and he really never got over it. We, at that time in '33, moved to Jamestown. And the rest of that time, we've been in the gem of Chautauqua County.
Now, you're known for being involved in the insurance business. Was your dad part of that at all?
No, after the war, we were fortunate. My wife and I went to Ohio University. Uncle Sam paid for that too. And I thought, man, it would be great to be a National Geographic photographer. But that didn't work out. You couldn't make any money, but you could make a little bit selling insurance. So from that time forward, that's what I did.
With regards to wartime, did you graduate from Jamestown High School?
1941. You guys weren't even born.
True.
Okay.
And did you get one of those special letters inviting you to the service?
No, that was another unusual. I had a lot of unique experiences. In 1941, there weren't too many jobs. I graduated in June 17, and I got a good job. I worked at Marlin Rockwell, and that's where I was on the 7th of December when Pearl Harbor was attacked. So we thought, gee, this is something maybe we should check out before we got the letter. And I happened to read a magazine someplace where the Marine Corps was looking for photographers. So I was an amateur photographer. Told them I couldn't even think about doing anything else. So I can't remember what the name of it was, but there was a commanding general that was in charge of, so they say, the photo section for the Marines, and I got a letter back from him. And he says, great. He says, your papers will be waiting for you in Erie. Well, I was 18 at that time. And, of course, my folks weren't too happy, but my dad did drive me to Erie. Nothing. They said, well, maybe it's in Buffalo. We drove up there, and there was nothing there either. So I figured fully on it. I stayed with Marlon Rockwell for a while, and then took the letter with me and finally went up to Fort Niagara and showed whoever would look at it the letter. I said, see, this is what, my papers were there. But as a consequence, the letter must have done something, because I kept telling everyone, no, the Air Force and photography were about the only things that I was capable of. Somebody believed me. And I wound up from Fort Niagara, we went to Atlantic City, which was rough basic training. We stayed in the Ambassador Hotel. And as I mentioned before, there is information like this that you already have on that tape. However, when we got there, it was in December, not quite as cold as this, almost. We pulled up to the hotel and had to wait while they took, I don't know, 6 or 8 stretchers out. Then we found out that on the top floor of the hotel was an infirmary, and these were all people that had died. Meningitis was prevalent at that time. So after Atlantic City, we went to Salt Lake City, Utah, which was not a training center, but a replacement center for the Air Force, where I was assigned to the 398th Bomb Group, B-17s, and was with them until the end of the war.
When they assigned you that, was you surprised, or did you?
I really wasn't surprised until afterwards, because I really do believe that something different happened to me, because I was really lucky in that actually I wasn't ever told exactly what I was supposed to do or where I was supposed to go. By that I mean, well, as an example, when we finally got to England, I had been on flying status in the States, and we were stationed in Rapid City for almost a year, training crews for overseas duty. And one of the things that we were supposed to do was to make sure that everyone on a new crew knew exactly where they were supposed to be and what they were supposed to be doing, which was great, because even I didn't know that. But that was normal at that time. And saying that I feel very fortunate was the fact that nobody was on my back all the time. Crew members really deserved a lot more credit than what at the time we gave them. These guys were together, up to 10 of them, and they lived in the same barracks and so forth. And if they were told to fly, they had to fly. So in England, when we first got there, we flew 25 missions as a crew, and you could go home. I was not a member of the crew. We happened to be part of, I think there were 16 members in the photo section for the group. So that was 4 to each squadron. At that point, I had a what we called a Class A pass, which meant that when I wasn't doing anything that was required, I could travel around the country, which I did. And again, afterwards, you recognize, man, you did some things and were able to do some things that most people didn't even have an opportunity. So as a result, what happens? We happened to be, we were there for D-Day, we were there for VE Day, VJ Day, we came home for that. My point simply is that a lot of the things that went on, hey, we saw the King and the Queen on VE Day. We were in front of Buckingham Palace. We had just come back from Scotland. When I say we, that was my future wife and I. And really lucky.
Let's talk a little, let's bore into this a little bit. When you got to England, where were you based out of?
We were based in Nuthamstead, which is near Cambridge, probably 25, 30 miles north of London.
And what was your, as part of the crew, you were a photographer?
Right.
And how did that work? You'd be on a mission and you'd be doing what?
Well, I was a photographer, and our job primarily in the photo section was to place cameras so that when the bombs dropped, we would photograph, or they would have photographs to see whether we actually had hit the targets that we were supposed to or claiming to. Started about 3 o'clock in the morning when the crews would be notified that they had a mission for that day. And
By the way, how were you notified?
people came around and shook your shoulder. That's basically how it happened. I have to explain. Our photo section was in a, well, being in photography, you had to have sort of a consistent heat, and it had to be dirt-free. So our section, these 16 guys, lived in a real primitive Nissen hut, something similar to this room. We had not carpeting, but we had linoleum on the floor. We were very, very adequately heated. Our sergeant decided it wasn't warm enough for pot-bellied stoves, which we couldn't have had anyway because of the dirt. And so he devised a heater made of about 4,000 watt electrical elements. Someplace he got a big sheet of copper and made a huge reflector. Every time he turned it on, all the lights on the base dimmed. But we were warm. Where the crew members lived in just conventional Nissen huts. They had to heat with pot-bellied stoves. Some of them would even start fires with their shoes, but they would eventually go to coal. And when they were called in the morning, they went to briefing, where they were told where they were going, what mission that day, how they were going to fly, what the routes were. We had to take our cameras and go out to the planes. Not all the planes had cameras, but right behind the bomb bay was a camera well, and they had still cameras that were actuated by the bombardier when he dropped the bombs. So when he dropped the bombs, he supposedly started the cameras, which followed the bombs down and recorded where he was supposed to hit.
Was this film or movies?
This was film.
Movies or stills?
Stills. These are all stills. It got so that this wasn't always something that they were thinking about for the target. A lot of them forgot to turn their cameras on. I always thought it was because they were too busy, but I think some of them didn't want the intelligence to know that, hey, we missed that by a long shot. But then when they came back, we took the cameras out, took the film back into the lab, and some of the guys in there developed the films and made prints, and these were taken up to G2, Group Intelligence, and determined just how effective that raid had been. When the guys came back, they were all interrogated, and they had to follow a whole bunch of rules. When we got back, we could basically do what we wanted to do. I've said this so many times that I just can't believe that I was able to do and get away with some of the things that we did. But we did what we were supposed to do, and that's all our captain expected of us. So you guys...
Did you go on some missions or just a few or what?
That's interesting too. As I say, I was on flying status in the States, and when we got overseas, flew a couple of times up until just about our first payday. And geez, I looked, and I wasn't getting any flight pay. So I went up. I had the opportunity of knowing our colonel and so forth, because you know, it's amazing. If you have a speed graphic camera and you walk around, a lot of people are always interested, hey, I could have a picture. So I mentioned the fact that we weren't on getting any flight pay, and was told that, well, the reason for that is that the command over there decided that they were losing too many photographers. And inasmuch as they only had 16, actually there was just 4 of us in the group, they figured, let's not let them go. I said, okay. Shortly after that, captain came in and says, you know, Colonel Hunter wants a photographer along on this particular mission, and he thought you'd like to go. I says, I'm going to get paid? I mean, stupid things like money. And, oh no. I said, why? Well, you know, we have, I don't know whether, I suppose the division said that the photographers weren't to fly. So I said, well, I don't think I should. And he said, well, what do you mean? Well, it would be very embarrassing if we flew and we didn't come back and they found out that somebody had told the photographer to fly. Oh, I never flew. After that, I went up a couple of times, but I figured, hey, these crew members flew 25 missions and went home. I could fly 1,000, I wouldn't go home. So, and it worked. I mean, I go back and say once again, some of the things that I was able to do, I suppose in some places they figured we were goofing off, but we really weren't. I mean,
So this is because of your Class A pass, right?
well, this is what I've always used. You know, a lot of this stuff is recollections. It's what I remember, either from experience or, hey, somebody said it, so it must have been right.
Well, you obviously at some point connected with the British lady who would ultimately be your wife. Was that base related?
Well, it was to me, yeah.
Yeah.
Because after I met Isabel,
How did you meet her?
you won't believe this.
Try me.
I met her at a dance, and I don't dance, but I was pretty good at intermissions. I'm not being facetious, but I always, when we first got there, once again, whenever I got to any base, one of my first impulses was just see where I was. I got off the base and I took pictures. So after we landed, I spent a lot of time in London and Cambridge. And somebody said, boy, you ought to go to Luton. They have a great football team. And they said, a lot of nice girls too, and dances. So I went to the dance, and from that point on, after I saw Isabel, I decided, hey, there's no need of going anyplace else. So when I had free time, that's where I went. Met her family. It took me months. The first night, I'm very adventurous, and I said, you want to go for a cup of tea? Because she didn't drink, and these dances were held in, it was a hall above the theater, cinema, and they sold no alcohol, which was all right with me, because I didn't drink that much. So I said, okay, we'll have a cup of tea. So we stopped and had tea. Then I said, I'll walk you home. She says, oh, no, it's not very far. And I said, no, it's okay. So we walked a couple blocks, and she says, well, I just live up the street. Okay. Now, this was in double British summertime. So it was light until 11 o'clock at night, at least. So, all right, I went back. I was staying at a bed and breakfast in the town. Subsequently, I took her home several times. Each time it got closer and closer to where she actually lived. Finally, would you believe, the first time was almost a mile from where she actually lived. But, you know, Americans, a lot of them didn't have a particularly good, well, our impression on some of the British, particularly the fathers, wasn't too great. But I was, once again, very fortunate because I met her family, and they were both great people. Her mother was a real nice lady and treated me like a son. She had a brother who was with the Argyll and Southern Highlanders in North Africa. and finally had a brother-in-law who was with the Royal Marines, and he was a D-Day invasion on gold. So I was just as much of their family as I was with my own family here at home. After I came back, I said, actually I asked her mother, and surprisingly, this was all right. But it was about a year that I got a call, and Isabel said that Pan Am, she'd put her name in, Pan Am said, well, we have a seat for you tomorrow morning, or tomorrow, from London to New York, which she took. Her whole family saw her off. I told my kids, and Raul, you know all our daughters, I told each one of them, I said, you ever try to pull anything like that on me, I would never let you go. And it always, once again, pretty lucky, because her parents must have felt that this was going to turn out okay for her. And I think she feels that way too. I know I do.
Yeah, that's terrific. How long were you in England then?
Probably a year and a half.
And what time period was this?
Well, this would have been from 44, 45.
And you were there on VE Day.
Yes.
What was the reaction?
Well, if you watch New Year's Eve, once again, we had been to Scotland. She had relatives up there. And we came back. And I was supposed to be back on the base, but I decided that was no time. We were in London, as I say, in front of Buckingham Palace, Queen Victoria Monument. You can't imagine the number of people. I mean, literally, you had to push people aside if you wanted to move at all. It was, again, one of the experiences that I had that quite lucky. I mentioned before, there aren't too many people left that can remember hearing some of the things, the actual voice of Adolf and Benito. And I told Mr. Zimmer that my experience started once again back in the 30s. Because if it hadn't been for some of the things that happened to them in the Great Depression, okay, I remember that. I remember Neville Chamberlain. Disturbed me a little bit about 5 years ago to see where I figure, once again, this is my impression of the people that were determining what was going to happen to our country were following exactly some of the things that I, as a kid, had seen in the 30s. And people were, I wrote a couple letters to the Post-Journal, and one of them I said that we're being molded into political correctness, and political correctness is going to kill me. And it could. And to see the people people are responding to some of the most stupid things that the government is pushing upon us now, and just saying, hey, it's politics. Well, it isn't. Again, this is just my opinion. So,
By the way, you mentioned Mussolini, Hitler, hearing their voices. These would be radio broadcasts that.
radio broadcasts, movies and that.
Did you
And-
suspect that at some point, you know, as Hitler was ramping up and Mussolini was allying with Hitler, that ultimately the U.S. would be gravitating into a war?
Oh, we knew that.
Yeah.
I mean, there was just, of course, Hamburg again had a great German population. And my dad was aware of the fact that even in Hamburg, the German-American Bund was quite strong. And you can understand why. I mean, Germany is a great country. The Germans are great people. And I have often said, even perhaps if I was in Germany at that time, instead of being in the U.S. Air Force, I might have been in the Luftwaffe, because everyone had a strong nationalistic feeling. We did here at that time. But it just got to the point where you could not believe the things that people were doing to one another. Families. If you wanted to disagree with the National Socialist Party, there was somebody who was going to tell someone in your district that your parents were not true Germans. But they were Germans, they just weren't Nazis. And as a result, what happened? Once again, this is something that I've always felt, and it just amazes me that people can't, in my mind, understand what's truly going on. If you lie to me once, and I know that you're lying, how can I expect to believe anything else that you say? I know this is not what I'm supposed to be talking about, but this is a result of our generation and the bringing up, and a lot of what happened to us and to our family is a result of what happened in Europe in the 1930s. Believe it or not, I happen to believe it.
On the base, you're at a flight base in England, and not everybody came back.
That's right.
What was the sense of the base when that happened?
You were, well, it's never going to happen to me. Hey, our squadron commander, he was from New England, Pete Rooney. He was a major, 23 years old. My point simply is that we were all kids, just like the ones in Vietnam, Afghanistan. You are invincible, in a sense. Maybe I shouldn't use that word, but I remember the first time that a plane landed with a casualty. And I saw his buddies pull him out of the waist. And it was an accident, you know. I'm positive that they all felt very, very shook up about it. I mentioned initially, I was not a crew member. So we were disassociated in a sense from these people because some of them were only there a couple of months. They flew their missions, and if they were fortunate, and they went home. But we lived apart from them, so our only experiences with them was when they were taking off, when they were landing. Oh, I met a bunch of them because they all wanted to come to the photo lab and have their films developed. But there are people in the area that have had the same experience. And Raleigh, how do people respond to something like that?
Some people internalize it. Some people, they can't function very well. It depends on the person who's involved in a combat death situation. It's hard to predict. But they have to, I think, my reading of World War II is these crew members knew they had to go back up again. It wasn't like if they did have a casualty, lost a crew member, lost a plane, if they survived, they were still obligated to go back again.
Well, most of them, when they came back, I suppose that they would go into their barracks, and many times somebody had already been in there and taken the man's all of his personal belongings out. And so you can imagine what, well, maybe you can't. I never could imagine what it would be like. And as I said, being disassociated in that sense, you knew that the guy was gone. I had one pretty good friend, Joe Geiser. He was from Buffalo, and his whole crew went missing in the North Atlantic. And I mean, MIA, they never found anything. So it's a difficult thing. It's like losing somebody close to you in an accident, and you come home and that person is no longer there. But these guys did, like Raleigh said. They knew that the next morning they were back up there. How some of them could do it, I don't know. It's just kids. It wasn't going to happen to me, and I know I felt that way.
Did you get enough points then in England that?
No, never got paid. But I did. We got some pictures. Some of them are in that disc that you have.
Yeah, we'll be anxious to see that. Was there, as you reflect back today, here we are, 2014, was there an incident or two which were just kind of humorous, either to yourself or you've observed, sort of a funny, and here you are in the intensity of the war, what's going on, flights, and you know that's a serious adventure you're on. But were there some kind of light moments that you can reflect on?
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously, it's, the periods you talk about were pretty intense, but we had a lot of things. One of the famous sayings that we had when the war was going in the Pacific was the Golden Gate in 48. That's when we were going to get home. But again, you must understand that for me, this was a real experience. Here is this kid from Western New York, Jamestown, practically grew up on my grandfather's farm, and all of a sudden, I'm able to visit some of the things that I had always romanticized about. I mean, man, I wanted to get to England, not the way I did, but I wanted to get over there, and I had quite a feeling walking into Westminster Abbey the first time and stepping on the graves of people that had been there for 1,000 years. Now, a lot of people didn't mean anything, but can you say you had a good time? I guess, in one sense, I did. That's why I say my situation is not parallel to most of them.
Leo, could I ask you a question about wartime in Britain? The stories I've read indicate it was a time of rationing and great sacrifice for the British people, and there was some resentment because the GIs had more money to spend and so forth than the British did. And was that true? Was there a little resentment because of that?
Oh, I'm sure there was. Once again, the ugly Americans still had some effect on the British, but it depends on who you were, where you were. Specifically what you're talking about, Isabel's mother would stand in line. She would travel on the bus. Buses ran right on the minute, but she'd have to travel downstairs. She'd have to travel downtown for her groceries. And these British women would stand in a line or a queue for whatever produce, baked goods, meat might be available. They would have coupons for everything. Well, maybe fresh vegetables were not, but and they would honor that line. They would honor that queue. Nobody would break it. So if you got there first, you got in first. And rationing was really severe. You got, again, I'm trying to recollect. I think they said they got something like 2 ounces of bacon or fat a week. Butter, I don't know, it was very, very limited. And it was something that we over here, not only can't we understand it, we probably would not have been able to go along with it. Sure, there was black market, but not that I was associated with or the people that I happened to be with.
When you came back and ultimately found your way into the insurance business, were there certain skill sets that you may have developed while you were in the Air Force that were applicable to what you did here? That legacy.
Well, I wouldn't say skills, it's just the way some of us are. Some people are able to work one way and some people are another. I mean, some of us were photographers, some of us were attorneys. And why are you an attorney? You know, a lot of I have some relatives that are lawyers. And
And you still like them?
Yes, for the main part.
Yeah.
I did find out, now this is no joke, when I was discharged, we went through sort of an aptitude situation. And you know what the guy told me? He says, you should go into law.
There you go.
He says, lawyers have got it made. When times are good, they help people establish their businesses. When times are bad, they assist them through bankruptcy. So how can you lose? No, I keep repeating this. I figure that I'm very lucky that my life here in Jamestown has been good. I wouldn't want to live anyplace else, and I've had the opportunities. The people are, for the most part, great. I won't go into the ones that aren't, but the ones that work and contribute to our society, great people. You know them.
Sure. Well, you're a great person, and I'm just thrilled you came in and joined us today, Leo.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. It's not often I get get the chance to tell people what I really think.
Well, that's terrific, and we look forward to making copies of this, if you don't mind, and I'll make it part of our archives here.
You do that. Once again, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Leo.
Thanks,
All right.
Raleigh.
Job well done. Okay, we'll get you unmiked here, Leo.